Hi, my name's Skye-Jane and I just finished my second year studying history and politics at Jesus College, Oxford. I've written over 70 essays now during my degree and maybe I have 30 to 40 more to go, and here's everything I've learned in that time. I distinctly remember when being sat my first essay, the sense of confusion and loss about how I was going to approach reading this from a clear A-level mark scheme with AO1, AO2 and AO3 sketched out. It felt like going from Super Mario Bros. 2D edition to an open world expansive version of Mario, like for Mario 3D World. I don't know if any of you played that on 3DS. Something I completely skipped and negated in the beginning is preparation. There's two parts to preparation. First, looking at the question and dissecting it. Second, actually practically constructing your note-taking method. First of all, you should look at the questions that you've been assigned. And I don't mean just look over them for 5 seconds and then panic. You try to dissect and understand what the question is saying before you start reading as a kind of guide, a map to your reading, if you will. So I'll give my last question that I did this term as an example, which was, to what extent did Britain benefit from her empire? So how would I dissect this question? There are a few things that are kind of popping out. So first of all, you need to look at the command, which is to what extent. Make sure you actually understand what that means and you're not just assuming. The other two areas that are really jumping out to me, number one, the word benefit. Number two, empire. Defining empire, for example, may seem simple, right? Britain's huge expanse and exploitation of many people. Well, not really, because you have to look at empire in a more nuanced way. For example, Britain's empire in the 18th century wasn't huge and it was really only developing. It was first and foremost an Atlantic empire and one based in Northern America. And another area to think about is benefit. What do we define as benefit? Economic benefit, social benefit, national benefit. As an extension of this, you can also think about the concept of Britishness. The people in North America who are migrating there or emigrating there from Britain themselves, are they still classed as British? And also I consider going into this question, do you already have background on the subject area you're doing? So if you're doing empire, have you actually ever learned anything about the British Empire before, or do you just kind of have vague notions about what it is? It should be kind of overview books on your course. So I know when I was doing modern Japan, skeleton books about the major changes during, for example, the Meiji era. I always set up a Google Doc when I'm starting a new essay. Each Google Doc, I generally put argument as a line in one color and I'll put that in bold, sub-arguments, context/method, so looking at how the historian has evaluated the past. Have they used, for example, lots of parliamentary sources the period? Have they looked at high or low politics? Have they followed a specific figure, looking at how they shed light on a particular historical phenomenon, for example? Only after we've prepared that we begin step 2, which is reading. This is going to take up the bulk of your time, so around 60% of the essay writing process. And this is really where you're downloading that data and the new knowledge into your brain to help you construct and respond to the question that you've been given. So I prefer to take notes onto paper first and then I transfer those onto a Google Doc, because the first time we read stuff, we tend to just write down everything. I prefer to really condense my notes down, so when it comes to revision, I will have very condensed notes, and if there's something I need to revisit, you don't need to feel the need to condense everything down. Sometimes kind of including that additional bit of knowledge is what makes your essay actually that bit better. I also put a page number so I can see exactly where the evidence that I'm referencing is, which is helpful for revision. And also when you're citing your work, I know different universities have different requirements for citing things, but I think it's good practice to know exactly where you're getting your evidence from. Also, when I'm reading, I like to keep a little notebook. Sometimes you're reading and it's not really relevant at all to anything that you're asking on the question, but it kind of prompts a thought in your mind and you just want to write it down. Or maybe you have an interesting word that you've kind of read and you want to go and find out what it means later. There's two ways you can get through in seemingly endless reading this. And the first one is using journal articles. So you can look at historians who have reviewed a piece of work and see what the main argument is. So if you just want the argument, you can do that. And you can also see some key critiques of the work itself. Say, for example, they've missed a particular area, a historian will usually highlight that. A second thing you can do, which is also a lifesaver, is open the chapters as PDFs and then Control F keywords from your question. Say the question is benefit and you're trying to look at something for economic benefit. Control F something like cost, money, wealth, public, and you're like to see if that chapter is actually relevant to what you're trying to read. So yeah, journal articles and control F are absolute lifesavers. Also, set yourself a cutoff or a limit time for reading, because it can just go on forever and ever. I mean, there's literally unlimited information online. So I usually give myself 2 to 3 days to read, setting a timer of anywhere between 45 and 90 minutes. When that's done, have a 10-minute break, go on a walk, get a snack, chat to a friend. I mean, me and my friend Pablo a lot in the first year used to study in the rad cam, and then we'd go and sit on the outside. Then we just talk about some random topic that was nothing to do with the reading for 10 minutes to refresh our minds, because I think after you're staring at the same PDF for a while, it all kind of starts to turn into a strange blur. Second question to ask, which is from Ali Abdal's Feel Good Productivity, which is a book I feel I've cited many times, is how can I make this process 5% more fun? One thing I like to do at the beginning of my sessions, at least, to kind of warm myself up, is put on classical music at a very, very low volume, and then I usually turn it down and turn it off after a while, but to kind of ease myself in and make the process more enjoyable. Or you can go to your favorite cafe and get a coffee or a pastry and try and motivate yourself that way, particularly when you really don't feel like doing the reading that week. Step number 3, plan and formulate your argument. This is the stage where you need to collate all the reading that you've done and all the uploading of information and try and produce something new out of your head, which is kind of a daunting task, I think. Please, please, please do not outsource this process to AI. This part is extremely important that you do yourself. So I really recommend just getting literally a blank piece of paper on a pucker pad, writing out your question in the center and putting on a 15-minute timer and jotting down everything that you can think about in response to that question and kind of what intuitively comes up after all of your reading. It's actually a lot easier and takes comparatively little time compared to the first 2 stages. I like to schedule a morning block for this. I usually start my writing in the morning, as this is where I'm most productive. Usually set a timer of say 60 minutes and try to see how many words I can write. You just want to get words down onto the page and you can review them later. Kind of a first draft that is pretty bad, and then you can later revise it. Writing is a skill that I sometimes wish I was better at, but I would recommend reading George Orwell's Politics and the English Language, because I think also when I first got to Oxford, I thought you needed to use quite flamboyant language, but you actually don't. You want to be concise, clear, and effective. And obviously it can be nice to have a great style, but that's not the most important thing to think about when you're writing an essay. And when I feel that I'm losing momentum, I actually have a hack, which is doing the bibliography, because sometimes I write up to 800, 900 words, I feel a bit stuck and I'm not sure what bit to kind of add next. I just go to the bibliography and add that in, and that can actually help me to get my momentum back. I would recommend just sitting down and trying to finish writing in one sitting, otherwise it can really just start to drag on. Once you've reached the word count, don't stop there. You still have a very crucial step, which is improving your writing. You really need to check for spelling and grammar, because even if you've written the best essay ever, if your spelling and grammar are sloppy, any reader is not going to be that convinced by what you've written, reading aloud or listening to your essay dictated out to you, because that really helps to see if your essay actually has flow and makes sense. Style and grammar and flow all kind of come into one in a way, because fundamentally an essay is trying to argue a point, is trying to convince your reader of something. So think about somebody trying to sell your product, say an apple. Person A describes the apple articulately, their tone varies, their sentence length varies, they're eloquent in their style, they're direct and they engage you, versus person B, who is sloppy with their words. They're often unclear. Are they talking about an apple? Or are they talking about a pear? Is the apple red or is the apple green? Who are you more likely to buy the apple from? In the same way, you want the reader of your essay to know that your essay is clear. There's little to no grammar errors, and they can focus on the argument and you convincing them of a specific position. I hope this helped, and if you're going to first year or you're an A-level student entering an essay competition, you're not going to write a perfect essay overnight. I certainly don't write perfect essays. You just need to think, each time I write an essay, I want to improve by 1%, because if you improve by 1% over and over and over again, you're going to be a lot better by the end. And yeah, I'll see you soon. Goodbye.